When the mountain opened, everyone ran. Everyone left everything behind. Everyone except you. You turned back. You had to. There was too much inside that chest to abandon. You told yourself, just the chest. Take the chest and go. It won't take long. This is the story of a merchant on Pompeii's last day. His name was Gaius Caecilius Felix. He had been trading in Pompeii for 18 years. Spices, perfumes, small luxuries brought from the East and sold at a considerable profit. He had a good eye for value, a sharp memory for prices, and the kind of patience that made him an excellent negotiator. His shop sat on one of Pompeii's busier streets, and the flat above it was where he slept. He was, by most measures, a careful man. Not reckless, not greedy, he would have said, simply practical. That chest, though, that chest was the problem. But in this story, you are Felix. This is your last day in Pompeii, and the chest is yours. You woke early and did what you always did first. You sat at the edge of the bed and ran through the numbers in your head. Not because you had forgotten them. You never forgot them, but the counting was a ritual, a way of beginning the day with the knowledge of exactly where you stood. How much was stored, how much was owed to you, how much you owed, the total. The total was good, better than last year, much better than the year before that. The chest sat against the far wall of the room, wooden, iron-banded, locked with a key you kept on a cord around your neck at all times. You had owned it for 11 years. You had moved it to 4 different rooms across 3 different cities before it ended up here, against this wall. In this flat above the shop in Pompeii. Inside it, coins, mostly silver, some gold. Several gemstones you had been sitting on for 2 years waiting for the right buyer. A debt certificate that, when collected, would be worth a solid month's income. Letters of credit. And at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, the small carved figure you had bought in the East many years ago. More for its beauty than its value, and had never sold because you always thought you would. And then somehow never did. You got up, washed, dressed. You went down to open the shop. 18 years of mornings in Pompeii. You knew this city by its sounds. The way the street vendors started before dawn. The particular echo of the forum at midday. The different quality of evening quiet in summer and winter. This morning sounded like every other morning. You didn't notice anything different. Nothing felt like a last time. The morning trade was steady. 3 customers before the 2nd hour. A woman who bought saffron and haggled with you for a quarter of an hour before accepting your price, which was fair, and you both knew it. A young man looking for a gift, clearly uncertain, who you guided toward the small amber pendant you had priced just within what his clothes suggested he could afford. A regular, a building contractor named Petronius, who stopped in for pepper and stayed to talk about a property dispute he was having with his neighbor. You listened to Petronius for longer than you needed to. He was good for steady business and the occasional referral. More importantly, he talked, and you learned things. Who was expanding their warehouse, who was struggling, who had recently inherited money and might be persuaded to spend some of it on something worthwhile. Information was its own kind of currency. You had learned that early. Between customers, you reorganized a display of small glass bottles, sorted some invoices, drafted a letter to a supplier in Puteoli who had been slow delivering a shipment of Eastern spices. The letter was firm but not unfriendly. You would need this man again. The morning passed the way good mornings passed, productively, quietly, each small task completed, each interaction filed away in your memory for later use. A merchant's life is made of small decisions. Each one barely matters on its own, but accumulated over 18 years, these small decisions become a business, a reputation, a livelihood. You had been careful with every one of them, and that was the pride you took in your work. Just past midday, you heard it. You were in the back room, checking stock against an invoice, when the shelf rattled. Faint, brief, then still. You looked at it. The clay jars had shifted slightly, their shadows moving on the wall. You went to the doorway and looked up. The mountain had changed. Something enormous was rising from it, dark and slow and relentless. The shape of it didn't make sense at first. Your mind kept trying to name it as smoke, as cloud, as something ordinary. But it kept rising and the shape kept growing, and there was a sound underneath it, low and continuous, that you felt more in your chest than heard with your ears. The street filled. People came from doorways, from side streets, from the forum. They stopped and looked up the way you were looking up. The voices started low and rose. Someone nearby was calling a name, over and over. A cart horse at the end of the street was pulling hard against its post, eyes white. The first stones began to fall, small at first, light as pumice, bounced off the paving stones with hollow sounds. You stood in your doorway and watched and thought, with the strange calm of someone who has not yet fully understood something. The stock, the chest, 18 years. There is a moment in every catastrophe before the body knows what the eyes are seeing. A gap, very short, between sight and understanding. In that gap, a person is still who they were before, still the person with the shop and the chest and the 18 years, for a moment more. You closed the shop door, not locked it. There was no time for that. You just pulled it shut and went upstairs. The stone steps were familiar under your feet. You had climbed them thousands of times. Your hand found the rail without needing to look. The room above was dim and quiet. The chest sat where it always sat, against the wall, solid and real. Through the window, you could see the sky. What had been blue was now a strange dim yellow. The column from the mountain was enormous. Stones were clicking against the roof tiles. You told yourself, be quick, take what matters most, go. You pulled the key from the cord at your neck. Your hands were steady. You had steady hands. It was something people remarked on. You inserted the key, turned it, lifted the lid. The coins, the gems, the debt certificate, the letters, and the carved figure at the bottom, wrapped in its cloth. You began to lift the chest. It was heavy. You knew how heavy it was. You had moved it before, across those 4 rooms and 3 cities. But those times you had planned, taken time, had help. Now it was just you, and the chest was full, and the stones on the roof were getting louder. You got it off the floor, took a step toward the door. The chest was everything you had built. Every morning you'd open the shop, every negotiation, every careful decision, every year of not spending what you could have spent. It was weight made of time. You had made it, and it was yours, and you were not leaving it. You made it down the stairs with the chest. This cost you more than you expected. By the bottom step, your arms were burning and your breath was short. You set it down for a moment in the doorway and breathed. Outside, the street was loud and thick with people. The pumice stones were falling steadily now, accumulating on the ground, on shoulders, on heads. People held whatever they could find above them. Cloth, boards, baskets. You looked toward the harbor. That was the direction. Get to the harbor. Find a boat. Leave. You lifted the chest again, took it through the doorway into the street. Moving through the crowd with it was harder than moving through an empty room. People pressed from every direction. Someone collided with you from the left and you staggered, but kept your footing. The chest scraped against your legs. Your arms had stopped burning and started shaking. You told yourself, keep moving. The harbor is not far. You have carried heavier things farther. Keep moving. 50 steps. 100. The ground was slick with a fine layer of pumice dust. Pale gray, strange underfoot. The sky above was wrong. The color and the light both wrong, and the column from the mountain had grown until it was simply the entire upper sky, dark and spreading. You were breathing very hard. The crowd pushed against you, and the chest was the heaviest thing you had ever carried. But you kept moving. At some point in carrying something too heavy for too long, the body begins to make calculations the mind doesn't approve of. The hands loosen slightly. The arms drop by degrees. The rational part of you says, further, further, but the body is already negotiating. You fell at the corner of the Via dell'Abbondanza. The stone was uneven there. You had known that for years, had stepped over it thousands of times without thinking. Today, you were not watching the ground. Today your arms were shaking, and your eyes were on the crowd ahead, and your feet found the stone wrong, and you went down. The chest hit the paving first. The lid flew open on impact. Coins scattered, rolling, catching the strange dim light before disappearing under trampling feet. The gems skittered into the crowd. The cloth-wrapped figure came to rest a few feet away, still wrapped, unharmed. You were on your hands and knees. Your palms were bleeding. Around you, the crowd continued to move, parting slightly around you, closing again behind. You looked at the coins on the ground. Yet you watched feet step over them and on them and past them. You watched someone bend, without slowing much, and pick something up and move on. You looked at the open chest. The death certificate was still inside. The letters. The carved figure. You started gathering coins, on your hands and knees on the paving stones of Pompeii, with pumice falling and the crowd moving around you and the sky the wrong color. You gathered coins. One, then another, a third. The body knows things before the mind admits them. Your hands were gathering coins because that was what they knew to do. Your mind had not yet told them to stop. Your mind was still back upstairs in the room above the shop, still believing it could carry the chest to the harbor. Your hands kept gathering. The street kept moving around you. You stopped gathering the coins. You don't know exactly when. There was no clear moment of decision. 1 minute your hands were moving across the paving stones, and the next they were still, and you were just kneeling there, and the chest was open in front of you with the figure still wrapped inside it, and the crowd was thinning now, because most people had already gone. You picked up the figure, unwrapped it slightly, to check it wasn't broken. It wasn't. The carved lines were still clean, the shape still exactly what it had been the day you bought it, many years ago, in a market far from here, from a man whose name you no longer remembered. You put it inside your tunic, against your chest. You left the chest. You stood up. Your hands were still bleeding. Your legs were unsteady. You looked at the chest sitting open on the ground, a few coins still inside it, and the death certificate starting to curl at the edge from the falling ash. 18 years. You turned north and walked. You left behind what you had built, the record of every careful decision, every patient year, every morning in the shop. It sat on the street in the falling ash, and you walked away from it. And the thing you carried instead was worth almost nothing. You had bought it on a whim, and kept it for no reason you could ever explain. And it was what you saved. The road out of the city was crowded, but moving. You walked with the figure pressed against your chest under your tunic. Your hands had stopped bleeding, or you had stopped noticing. The pumice was falling heavier now, and everyone had something held over their heads. You found a piece of flat board somewhere, you don't remember where, and held it above you, and walked. Around you were people you knew, and people you didn't. Petronius the contractor was there, moving fast with a pack on his back, and 2 children beside him. He saw you, and gave a brief nod and kept moving. The woman who bought saffron that morning was ahead of you, walking steadily. You didn't call out to her. There was nothing to say. The road climbed slightly as it left the city. From a slight rise you could look back. The column from the mountain was still growing. At the city below it was disappearing into a gray haze, building by building, street by street. Your shop was down there, your flat, the chest. You looked at it for a moment. Then you looked at the road ahead and kept walking. The figure pressed against your chest. You could feel its edges through the cloth of your tunic. Small and real, and still exactly what it had always been. We spend years building things, and we believe, because we have to believe, that the things we build are the same as what we are. The shop is you, the chest is you, the 18 years are you, and then one day you find out what you actually are, what you actually carry, when everything else is gone. You kept walking. Behind you, the city disappeared. Ahead of you, the road continued into the afternoon. You settled eventually in Neapolis. You found a room. Then, a small space to trade from. Then something that slowly became a shop again. You knew how to do this. You had done it before, in smaller ways, building upward from almost nothing. You still had the knowledge of prices, the memory for names and faces, the patience that made you a good negotiator. You did not have the chest, the debt certificate, the letters, the coins scattered on the paving stones of a street that no longer existed. You had the carved figure. It sat on the windowsill of your room in Neapolis, in a city you were still learning to navigate, catching whatever light came in. You had stopped keeping it wrapped. There was no reason to protect it anymore. It could just be what it was. Petronius found you 6 months later. He had started a building venture in Neapolis and needed supplies. He had remembered you from Pompeii, from the years of steady trade and the letters you sent that were firm but not unfriendly. He came to find you. You started again, not from nothing, never quite from nothing. 18 years of small, careful decisions had left something behind that couldn't be put in a chest. The knowledge was still there. The reputation was portable. The patience was yours and couldn't be scattered on a paving stone by a fall. What you carry out of a disaster tells you more about yourself than anything you managed to hold on to during ordinary times. You left the gold. You kept the carved figure. You never entirely understood why. Perhaps that was the point. The figure sat on the windowsill. Neapolis moved outside. You opened the shop. You started again. The chest was found eventually, not by the archaeologists who would come much later, though they found many chests and many coins and many lives preserved in the ash. This chest was found the same day, within the hour, by someone moving through the thinning crowd who saw it open on the ground and stopped. A young man, probably, or a woman, someone quick-eyed and practical, someone who understood that what was left behind in a disaster had no owner anymore. At least not one who was likely to return and claim it. They took what was left in it. The coins, the document, whatever they could carry. Then they moved on. The chest itself stayed, too heavy to carry quickly, not valuable enough on its own to be worth the effort. And it sat on the paving stones of the Via dell'Abbondanza as the ash fell thicker and the crowd thinned to almost nothing, and then to nothing at all. The ash covered it. Then more ash covered that. The city went quiet in the particular way of something that has stopped completely, not resting but finished. The chest sat there for a long time. Pompeii preserved everything it swallowed. The bread in the ovens, the graffiti on the walls, the people where they fell. Somewhere under the ash, a chest sat open on a street. The lid caught at an angle, the inside empty, the iron bands beginning their long, slow work of rust, waiting as everything in Pompeii waited to be found. 18 years. All of it. Still there. Archaeologists excavating Pompeii have found numerous examples of valuables left behind, abandoned mid-escape, and or buried with their owners. Strong boxes, vias have been found in homes and shops, some open, some still locked. Hordes of coins have been discovered on streets and in doorways. The excavations have also revealed something more interesting, what people chose to carry versus what they left behind. Practical items appear in the hands of skeletons found on the roads, but personal objects, things of sentiment rather than monetary value, appear just as often. A small bronze mirror, a clay lamp with a worn handle, a carved bone pendant. Felix is not a real name from the historical record, but his kind of man certainly existed in Pompeii. The city was full of merchants, and on August 24th, 79 AD, each one of them faced the same problem. What can you carry? What do you leave? The chest and everything in it is still there, somewhere. Good night.